I've always been an advocate of the language. I heard a scholar talk once. He said when you talk English, you think English. And he said when you speak Ojibwe, you think Ojibwe. A few years ago, I went to school to deal with a chemically dependent person. And after I graduated, I gave myself 5 years to sober up the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. After 2 years, I was fighting a losing battle. So I went over and talked to one of the elders from here. He was from Aanjibimaadizing. And I asked him, I said, what's going on here? Why are we struggling? Well, he told me, he said, Joe, we live in two lives. We live in two worlds. He said, we live in a white world, and he said, we live in an Indian world. And he said, I think we need to just get back to being Indian again. I said, how do we get there? And he said, well, one of the things we need to do is probably get back to our language again.
Our language allows us to do things uniquely that make us Annishinabe. First and foremost, our ceremonies, that we were given these things to do, and our language is our conduit. It's our power source that allows us to communicate with the Manidug, with the world, with the universe and the cosmos, when we ask for help, when we celebrate life, when we show how appreciative we are of the gifts of like Manumin or the plants of the earth or this good life that we have with one another. And the language is the centerpiece for that, is the linkage, the system that holds those things together. So when we engage in that, we're fulfilled, we're sustained, we validate ourselves with that. We celebrate the uniqueness of our individuality and one another, our interconnectedness with all things.
I spent the better part of 10 years working with people who lost their relatives, and so we did traditional funerals, and we did sometimes several funerals a month. Part of the funeral is translating the funeral for families and helping them understand what the procedure is. What I've noticed is that for the past 10 years or so, I've watched dozens of families come in and not know what's happening, and they don't get to experience the actual beauty and like the inherent beauty that we've been given as a people that is inside ceremonial procedures and the stories. And so what happens is when you're grieving, you come into a ceremonial space, you go through the motions and use tobacco, you listen to the person who's executing the ceremony, and then you leave. And you don't really have a vessel to put your grief in, and you don't know how to handle it. And what happens is, because our people can't manifest and visualize what's happening with their relative in order to let them go, that they usually have a tougher time with their grief and loss. And so what we see is compounded grief and loss, and that manifests in social disparities and different kinds of dysfunctional family cycles. And so what the goal behind language revitalization is not just a novelty, let's learn a second language that is really cool. It's about giving people the inherent tools that were intended for them so that they can process life, so that they can process grief and loss, and so that they can anchor themselves in what was intended for them spiritually.
I think it's important to continue working on this preservation project because it's our identity. And I feel like if we lose it, we lose not only the language, but a huge part of our cultural identity. And that's a huge loss. I can see elders that are passing, and it scares me a little because we won't have those stories then. The stories will die with them. And so I'm happy here to help preserve that and get their stories because they have so many stories to be told.
Personally, I think that language and culture help me, remind me, and inspire me to be that balance. And I feel like it's necessary for that balance, and it's hard to sort of describe. Without it, I would almost feel like a little lost leaf that was blowing in the wind. With it, I feel sort of like attached to a tree, and which has a strong base and roots. And I have other leaf people around me, and I'm not alone.
So there's a teaching about some of our traditional aspects of our lives. We're told that these gifts that we have, the things that make us uniquely Annishinabe, were given to us for a reason. And that reason was to live a good life, to celebrate, to be happy about who we are as Annishinabe people. And also with that teaching comes the responsibility to treat those gifts with respect, to nurture them and to take care of them and embrace them. Engage in ways that foster and sustain their development. So when we think about that, this teaching of respecting all things and respecting all beings, including ourselves, in that we weren't put here to suffer. When you contextualize that, frame that with the importance of our language as probably our most important intellectual resource.
So if we stop using Ojibwe, and if we stop practicing our cultural practices that are dictated by our language and kind of dictated by our natural world and seasonal cycles, if we stop that, our ability to self-govern can be challenged. And we have lots of bands in Minnesota, and we have lots of examples of nations, Indian nations all across the US and Canada who have their federal recognition compromised, questioned, eliminated. We're the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. We have so much to offer people, and we have so much to share, our unique existence as a people. We have so much to give. We're all responsible for the well-being of the band. So even though it's intimidating, my goal as a leader and my goal as a young language learner is to help people be comfortable with being uncomfortable and to help them move in that direction for the well-being of future generations so that they can experience and exist with all of the things that we have today. That's the goal.
Language and culture are intertwined because how can you tell a good joke without Ojibwe? How can you send someone to the happy hunting grounds or the next place without Ojibwe? How can you find their name without Ojibwe? So we need it. We need our language to be able to be ourselves. Everything about ourselves is tied to our language.